So if anyone misses class ever, you can just YouTube Father Dwight Campbell, and it's Advanced Morality. If you plug that in, and it'll come up. I do it through the St. Joseph's YouTube, whatever it is. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. I'm not an electronic guy. I just do what they tell me, and it works, and I'm satisfied. Okay. So you listen to that tape on relativism, right? Okay. So tell me, what is relativism when we talk about relativism? What are we talking about when we say relativism? Okay. Just go from your memory. Okay. You listen to the whole talk. You got the flavor of what. I don't need an exact definition. Just give it to me in your own words, Catherine. What do you think relativism is? Just don't look. Okay.
I'm trying to remember.
Okay. Well, Pope Benedict XVI, who's now the Pope Emeritus, he talks about how in our age there is a dictatorship of relativism. And relativism is like a dictatorship now. You have to be relativistic. If you say that you have the truth about something, people say, well, how can you say that? Because I believe this way. And it's really not a logical, well thought out approach to life, especially morality. As moral relativists, what do they say? What's the bottom line for moral relativists? What's the bottom line? If you're a moral relativist,
I can believe whatever I want.
Believe whatever you want. I can do whatever I want. Okay, everyone's their own God, right? So I can make up my own moral code. I can do whatever I want to do. And did I write on the board last week? I don't know if I did. This little phrase here, boy. Let's see if I can get a pen that writes with a. Okay, good. Do as thou wilt. Or I'll just say will. Wilt is the old way of saying do as thou wilt. This is Anton LaVey, okay? And this is from the Satanic Bible. Okay. This is Satan's byline. Do as thou wilt. Whatever you want to do it. Okay? If it feels good, do it. You don't have to follow anyone else's code. Do what you want to do. And that, unfortunately, is the mentality of some people, even though they don't really understand it this way, because when you say, well, I'll do whatever feels good in the situation, this is what you're talking about. Okay? And that's what moral relativism is really about. And this conflicts with Christian belief. Why is that? Because what did Jesus tell us? Well, I'll just, before I ask that, moral relativism denies objective truth. There's no objective truth. There's no truth that applies to everyone. No truth that's really true outside of your mind. Everything's based upon, if you're a moral relativist, it's my choice to do this or that, so whatever anyone else believes, that's fine. There's no moral truth that binds everyone, no truth outside the mind. And Jesus, by his teaching, how does he refute that? What does Jesus say? That was the first question on all the questions, okay, if you remember. From Greg Stefanik, I think it was his name, who gave that talk. Okay. What is it that Jesus told us? What did he What did he proclaim when he came? Does anyone know? What?
I'm the way, the truth, and the life.
I'm the way, the truth, and the life. That's it. Okay, so Jesus tells us that there is a truth, and he's the truth, and he's telling us the truth. So the truth that applies to everyone. And when Jesus said this to Pontius Pilate, what was Pilate's response, Nick? What did Pilate say when Jesus said, I'm the truth, I'm the way, I'm the truth? Pilate responded with what?
He asked what is truth.
What is truth? He was a pagan. What is the truth? If you're a skeptic, you say, I can't know the truth. Well, we can know the truth, and we can know the truth two ways. So, moral relativists, this is basically moral relativism, okay? Moral relativism, okay? Moral relativism denies objective truth, okay? And each individual makes up their own truth. Okay? Each person, you could say, or individual, I'll say, that's better. Each individual makes up their own truth, okay, or moral code to live by. Okay, so that's what a moral relativist is. Denies subjective truth. Each individual makes up their own moral truth, moral code. This is, you could say, subjective. It's subjective. It focuses on the subject. Okay, subject meaning the individual. Okay, the individual subject. It's subjective. And this basically equals this, okay? That's what we're talking about here. Because this was the temptation offered to Eve. Eat the fruit, the forbidden fruit, and you will be like gods. Okay? You'll get to make up your own moral code, do whatever you want to do. Okay? Whatever I want to do, whatever feels good, do it. So, the fact is that there is objective truth, and we can know objective truth. And there are two ways, okay, to know what is really true, objective truth, okay. One is what? How can we know the truth about lying and stealing and doing other bad things, murder? One way is to use our reason. Okay? Use of our reason. Our intellect. Okay? And this is called the natural law. Okay? Which is using our reason intellect. Okay, it's the natural law. Okay, to know basic moral truths. Okay. When I say truths, I mean objective truths that apply to everyone. Okay. Okay. Lying. Okay. Stealing. Murder, etc. Okay. The natural law it's the law written on our hearts. That's what St. Paul says, the natural law. We can use our reason, our intellect to know what truth is. And the natural law, I'll just say NL, okay, natural law, is written on our hearts. Written on our hearts. And St. Paul's letter to the Romans, okay, I'm going to read it for you here. I brought my little Bible. St. Paul's letter to the Romans. You know, a good Lenten thing to do if you haven't taken any positive things to do in Lent, besides giving up things, is to read through the Gospels. It's a good thing to do. It doesn't take that long. You can do it over the period of 40 days, even with the time remaining. But St. Paul, he talks about the natural law written on our hearts, and this is what St. Paul says about the pagans who didn't have the law. They didn't have the law of Moses, okay? But he says, for whoever have sinned without the law of Moses will perish without the law. Whoever have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not they who hear the law that are just in the sight of God, but they who follow the law. And when the Gentiles, that is the non-Jews, who have not the law, do by nature what the law prescribes, okay, don't steal and lie and murder and these things, okay, they show the work of the law written in their hearts. Their conscience bears witness to them. So, St. Paul is saying that even the pagans, they're going to be judged whether they followed their reason, because God gives us a reason to know basic right and wrong. Even if you were never taught the commandments, you should know that stealing, murder, lying, doing other bad things are wrong. That's why God gave us an intellect. So even the pagans couldn't say, well, gosh, we never had the law of Moses, we're innocent. No, St. Paul is telling us something here, that the natural law is written on our hearts, and the great pagan philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, you know, they had come to the same moral conclusions about you know, bad things like lying, stealing, and murder just by use of their reason. And they talked about the natural law. That's one way that we can know objective truth. What do you think the other way of knowing objective truth is? That these things are wrong. It's through not the use of our reason, but there's another way, another means, which I kind of mentioned already, if you were listening. Anyone guess what it is?
Free will.
Well, not free will, but it's something that God has given us. Something that God has given us. Not our reason and intellect, but actually He made it easy for us, so we wouldn't even have to exercise our intellect to know it's wrong to lie and steal and murder. The other way of knowing objective truth is, number 2, okay, God's revelation. Okay? God has revealed it. Okay? He's revealed the truth. Okay? For example, okay, where do we learn that it's wrong to lie, to steal, to murder, to commit adultery, to covet your neighbor's wife and goods? Where did God give us this? Where, Catherine, I know you're thinking.
What?
Where did God give us the what?
Bible.
And where? Specifically. The what? Well, no, where did God tell us that it's wrong to lie, to steal, to murder?
Oh,
to...
the Ten Commandments.
The Ten Commandments, yeah. Okay, He gave us the Ten Commandments. Okay. Okay. And then Jesus came. Okay. And he taught us even more, okay? He taught us how to love, the law of love, okay? The law of love, okay? Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. The Beatitudes, okay? That's how to follow God more fully, okay? So, Jesus, he's the way, the truth, and the life. He gives us objective truth. The Ten Commandments, they apply to everyone. And God gave them to us because he revealed them to us, okay, to make it easy for people who couldn't, maybe, so that people wouldn't have an excuse that, well, I didn't know it was wrong to lie and steal and murder and do all these things, okay? So 2 ways to know objective truth. Use our reason, intellect, the natural law in our hearts. And God has revealed the truth. The Ten Commandments, the Old Testament, the New Testament, Jesus, he fully revealed how we're supposed to be living. Okay? So, now last week we, well, let me just go back to that tape on relativism. Okay? Anything that struck you in what he said, because Greg Stefanik, in presenting the position of relativism, argued ad absurdum. Have you heard that term? To argue ad absurdum. You argue to the absurd. You show how absurd, if you take relativism to its logical conclusion, what does it mean? He tried to make that point in a funny way. He used some examples. Okay, if you're a moral relativist, can anyone remember some of the things he said? It's been a while since I listened to it. Do you remember, Amy, for example?
Well, one of the things he said was, it's true for me that nothing is true for everybody. And that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. If it's an objective truth that what's true for me doesn't necessarily have to be true for everyone, well, does that apply to everyone? Well, then that's an objective truth. It's self-contradictory, in other words. To say that, oh, everyone has to decide for themselves. Well, is that an objective truth? Then you're no longer a moral relativist, because you're saying that there is an objective truth. But I think he tried to give a number of examples in that talk which showed the absurdity of holding this position of being a moral relativist. Because, and as I pointed out last week, when people talk about moral relativism, they're usually not talking about lying and stealing and murder. They're talking about sexual morality, because this gives them the license to do whatever they want to do. They don't have to follow the 6th commandment or the 9th commandment. And actually, murder comes under it too, because now they want to murder in order to carry on their sexual activity. And I'm referring to abortion, because that's what abortion really concerns. Okay, people are having sexual relations without wanting to have a child, the natural result. So they want to kill the child, so they'll defend it. Okay, and if you apply this moral relativistic thinking to other areas, if you compare abortion, okay, I wouldn't have an abortion myself, but I'm not going to impose my morality on others. Well, we don't argue that way with slavery, okay, or child trafficking in sex throughout the world. It's a big problem, okay. So the moral relativist arguments, they break down if you really think it's not reasonable. There is an objective truth. That's what we believe as Catholics, so we follow it. And as I mentioned, our previous Pope talked about a dictatorship of relativism. So now people are wanting to force their immorality on us. Have you heard about, there's a case going on, and I talked about this last term in my class. There's a case in Colorado, and actually there's a case in Arizona too. Their cases are springing up all over, where people do not want to go along with an immoral agenda, what they consider an immoral agenda. But they're being forced to, you could say, from a dictatorship of relativism. There was a man I showed a YouTube clip. Maybe you've seen it on the news. He owned a bakery shop. He made wedding cakes. And two guys walk in, and they say, "We'd like a wedding cake." And he says, "Okay." They said, "For us, we're getting married." He says, "Well, no." He says, I disagree with, I'm a Christian. I don't hold to two people of the same sex getting married, okay, because that's not part of what marriage is. Okay? Marriage is a man and a woman. Okay? He says, "So I can't help you." He says, I can service you in other ways." But he said, "I'm not going to make a cake, and put two guys up on the top of it, because this is going against my morality." Well, they ended up taking him to court and are trying to force him to violate his conscience. That's an example of the dictatorship of relativism. If I own a private business, and if I don't want to cater to people who are engaging in immoral activity, I should be able to do this. If I own a bed and breakfast, see, that's another thing. In Illinois, there were couples that owned bed and breakfasts. Do you know what that is? Okay. You have your house, and then you let out the upstairs to someone coming in, and two people of the same sex show up. You say, "Well, I'm not going to rent my house to you. This is wrong." Okay. To say, you're going to be performing or might be performing immoral activities upstairs right above my house. I don't want you in my house. Okay? I mean, to carry it to the extreme, if two guys show up in drag, okay, and you have kids in the house, well, no, we demand that you rent us a room. You have a bed and breakfast. It's open to the public. No, I'm not going to do this. And they're getting sued for this. This is another example of the dictatorship of relativism. So Christians are going to be punished because it seems the law, people have been propagandized by the gay agenda, as it's called, and are forcing Christians to go against their conscience. Another example, of course, is the new healthcare law, which the government says that we must, as Catholics, go along and provide insurance for people for contraception and abortion-causing pills. We say no. We're not the only ones out there opposing this. Hobby Lobby, have you heard of them? Okay. They're in court right now. Their case is being decided by the Supreme Court because under the new Health Care Act, if you fail to go along with their guidelines and provide insurance for people under their guidelines, then you can be fined, I think it's $100 a day per employee, which will break a company. That's what it's intended to do. And Hobby Lobby said, well, we're not going to provide through insurance to our employees to make available to them a pill that kills babies. We won't do that. And the government says, no, you have to do it. And to show how extreme the government is in this, if you get online, and I forget what the religious order, but they're an order of nuns. And they're out west somewhere, and they refuse to go along with the health care, providing insurance for themselves and a few workers, and the government's forcing them to do it too. And I mean, this is wrong. This is how relativism is a threat to our religious liberty, our religious freedoms. So it's like my will trumps your religious rights and your religious liberty. You're going to have to conform your will to my will because I say so. Well, no. And it's important because as Christians we have to be willing to suffer for this. Okay? You know what the early martyrs were martyred for? You know what? You read the accounts. You know why they were martyred? Do you know why? In the first 300 years of the church, most of the emperors were pagans, and a good number of them were were opposed to Christians, and they put to death Christians. Do you know why they were put to death? Does anyone know why? Take a guess. I mean, what was the reason they were put to death? Anybody? Take a guess. Someone.
Because they believed in God.
They believed in God. They refused to worship the pagan gods. You could have saved your life if you went up in the public square and just took a little bit of incense and threw it in the fire. Even though you didn't believe in the pagan gods, you could have saved your life if you just went, boom, okay, I don't believe in this, but I'm going to do it anyway. But the Christians refused to do that. Why did they refuse to do that? Why do you think? Why would you refuse to put a little incense in a fire and burn it to the pagan gods, even if you didn't believe it? Why would you refuse to do it? Anthony, can you give me, think, why would you refuse to do that?
Because it was violating your own moral view or...
And something else. Anyone else? Andrew, give me that. Take a guess. Why else would you not want to do this? Think about other people, the impression it would make on other people. What would other people think if they know you're a Christian and you're taking incense and putting it in the fire, burning it to a pagan god? What would they think?
They think that you're no longer a Christian.
Yeah, it's giving scandal. Okay? We're giving scandal to the people of faith. Oh, look at, they're doing this. St. Thomas More lost his head in England. Have any of you ever seen The Man for All Seasons? The movie? Do you know the story? St. Thomas More, why he lost his head? Because he wouldn't take an oath saying that King Henry VIII was the head of the church in England. And he said, no, I'm not going to take an oath, and because if I take the oath, I'm really not being honest with myself. The king was forcing everyone to do that, so he ended up losing his head. St. Thomas More's last words, famous, I die the king's good servant, but God's first. So, to be willing to die rather than burn a little incense to the pagan gods, well, we should be willing to suffer loss of business or other things, not to go along with evil agenda, evil law. Because an unjust law is no law at all. This healthcare law forcing people to do what would go against their conscience is not really a law. A law has to be in accord with God's law to be a true law. We have the duty and obligation to disobey a law, even if it means going to prison, even if it means being put to death. And that may come someday, because it's getting much worse as time goes on. The assault against the Christians. So anyway, this is one of the fallouts of the culture of relativism and the dictatorship of relativism. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Do you think it was good, the talk? Was it thought-provoking? Okay, and I thought so. I thought it was the best presentation I've ever heard on it. And he's a very talented guy, Christopher Stefanik. He's the youth minister in the Archdiocese of Denver, I think, Colorado. Anyway, let me see here. Just take out this sheet, okay, once again, because I'm going to just review this once again. I went through this rather quickly last week, and I think it was last Wednesday, actually, because Friday Mrs. Pitbane didn't tell me that I had a short schedule. Yes?
I was gone.
Okay. There you go. Okay, remember, on this side of the sheet, okay, we're body, soul individuals, okay? When we're talking about morality, we have to talk about who we are as persons. How God made us. Okay? He made us body and soul. Our senses are attracted to pleasure, food, sex, beauty, okay? Naturally. Okay? Our soul is composed of all these different parts of the soul, you could say. Intellect, memory, free will, imagination, emotions. The things that separate us from the lower animals are what? What separates us from the dogs, the cats, the chimps, the elephants, all those brute beasts in regard to the makeup of our soul? They have some of what's listed there, but they don't have all of these things. What don't they have? Two things. What is it? They don't have what? Intellect and free will. They don't have it, okay? They don't have an intellect to think and reason with. Okay? No reflective knowledge. No animal has them. They don't have a free will. They act by instinct. That's what animals act on. We have an intellect and free will, which evolution can't explain. Now, you may believe in evolution. I don't. Not for religious reasons, for scientific reasons, because it's an unproven theory. Never been proved that one species evolved to another. We've never found the links between the species in 180 years after Darwin proposed his theory. And if you're a pure materialist, you can't prove your theory, because you have to say that out of the Big Bang, life came from inanimate, lifeless matter. And there's no proof of that. You have to believe that on faith. Even Richard Dawkins, I showed a film a couple terms ago, Richard Dawkins, who makes fun of Christians. He wrote a book called The God Delusion. People who believe in God are delusional, that's what he says. He admitted to Ben Stein in a movie, the actor Ben Stein, that the mathematical probabilities of life beginning from inanimate matter are so remote that it didn't happen. And then Ben Stein asked him, well, how do you explain life on Earth? And do you know what he said? Do you remember, Claire, what he said? Did you see that? Maybe it was the first term I showed you. Okay. Richard Dawkins said, the famous physicist, he's an astrophysicist, okay, or biological. He's in biology, that's right, not physics. He said, space aliens. Aliens from other planets seeded life on this Earth. So what's the next logical question after that? Where did the aliens get life from? Okay, that's the next logical question. So anyway, so we're different from the animals. That's what it means God created us. Okay? He created Adam and Eve. And remember, when God created us, everything's working together nicely here. But then the original sin takes place, and everything's disrupted. Now, we don't act by a good judgment of the intellect all the time. St. Paul says, okay, I don't do the good that I want to do, and I do the evil that I don't wish to do. In other words, I'm weak. We all admit we're weak. Sometimes we don't do what we know we should do. We do the things that we know we shouldn't do. Okay? That's the situation of all of us. Okay? Another thing I'll just point out on this first page, with the intellect, the free will, the memory. We have a memory to recall things, imagination, emotions. Well, the emotions especially, they're linked with the body. It's not just an intellectual thing with us. Because when we get angry, our body changes. Your body actually can heat up. When you get excited about something, your body, your heart will start pumping faster, okay? So our emotions affect our body, okay? Especially. So you turn to the other side now, and the important things to know here, okay? When God created us, okay, is original justice written on there? Yeah, it is, okay. On the right side, Adam and Eve, okay? We were in a state of original justice when God created Adam and Eve, the human race. And Adam and Eve possessed, the first thing, sanctifying grace. And what is sanctifying grace? Very important. It's our share in God's life that God put in our souls when He made us. That gives us the right to get to heaven. We have to be in a state of grace to receive Holy Communion. So that made them friends with God. It gave them the right to heaven. They had great knowledge, a will governed by reason, much more than ours, a stronger will. Happiness in paradise. They didn't have suffering, they didn't have pain, didn't have an inclination to evil. That's called concupiscence. I just want to talk about that for a minute. Concupiscence. Okay. Had any of you studied concupiscence before in your moral theology? Have you seen that term? Okay. What concupiscence means really is the rebelliousness that's within us as the result of original sin. Even though original sin is washed away in baptism for us, we still have concupiscence. We still find it hard to do what we should do, to submit our will to someone else. It's difficult. You know when concupiscence becomes evident in people? At 2 years of age. That's what they call the terrible twos. Because what's the first thing that little kids learn to say, about the first thing they learn to say, is no. You tell them to do something, they say no. Why are they saying no? It's concupiscence. This is the reason. Okay? This rebelliousness that's ingrained in us because of our fallen human nature. Okay? That's what concupiscence refers to. Okay? The inclination to evil. Okay? We're inclined, all of us, to not do the good that we should do. Okay? So, and just so you know, it's possible for anybody to do anything. You know, we look at the Nazis back in World War II. You know, putting people in gas chambers. The Nazis are human beings. Any of us is capable of doing evil. Any human being, not just one certain class of human beings. I just saw a movie the other day with a couple of priests. Anyone see 12 Years a Slave? Didn't see it. Oh. It won the Academy Award. Did you know that? 12 Years a Slave. Okay. You know what it's about? True story. There was a black free man in the North. He lived in Saratoga, New York. He went to Washington. He played violin. He was very well schooled in a lot of things, and in music, one of them. And he ends up getting either drugged or drunk. Okay, we're not sure what happened, but he ends up being a slave, kidnapped and shipped to New Orleans. And he lives for 12 years as a slave. And it shows really in a very powerful way the brutality of the slave owners. And I wouldn't say that was all the slave owners, okay? But they were trying to make a point that he went from one slave owner to another, how harshly and brutally and unjustly the slaves were treated. Okay? And the second slave owner he goes to is really a brutal man who even uses the scriptures to justify him. Look into the Old Testament, saying, "Oh, the Old Testament, talked about slavery, and the slave that even the New Testament, Jesus talks about the slave that disobeys his master gets more stripes." Well, they used that line to whip their slaves when they did not conform to their expectations. Okay, and very powerful movie. You have to have a little strong stomach to go see it, but it's worth seeing. I recommend it, okay? Because it portrays the life of the slaves in the South. Like I said, not that everyone was treated this brutally, but they were trying to make a point. And this man wrote about his own experiences. He ended up getting released and going back to New York, being united with his family once again, and he wrote the book 12 Years a Slave. He was a slave from, I think, 1940 to 1952. It was before the Civil War. So, what time does our class end? Now? Okay, we'll pick up tomorrow. We won't have